Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Random Rewatch. This is Mike, and we are doing a special episode this time as a tribute to the late, great Hollywood legend Gene Hackman, who died under, unfortunately, tragic circumstances very recently. Obviously, there are a ton of movies to choose from. Gene Hackman's IMDb lists 101 acting credits and 121 credits as himself in documentaries, interviews, that type of thing, in addition to his work as a voiceover artist in commercials. The man was completely prolific and is absolutely one of the most significant actors of the entire history of Hollywood. Dating from his first role in 1961 up until his last professional acting credit in 2004 and his last professional credit as a voiceover artist in 2017, including a 2008 episode of Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives. And I did not make that up. But I have decided to do for this one of my favorite Gene Hackman performances. This is 1995's Tony Scott film Crimson Tide.
There's trouble in Russia. So they called us. And we're going over there and bringing the most lethal killing machine ever devised.
The last time we hit this state of emergency was 32 and a half years ago during the Cuban Missile Crisis. So this is what it's all about, gentlemen. It's what we trained for.
Submerge the ship.
Diving officer, submerge the ship, make it depth 150 feet.
On the 1MC. Dive.
This year,
we have a properly formatted emergency action message from National Command Authority.
what we've always known
Bravo, Echo, Charlie, Alpha.
becomes what we've always feared.
Gentlemen, this is the captain. Russian rebels have threatened to launch against our country and are fueling right now. This is not a drill.
Now,
Sir, we have a possibly submerged submarine.
You find out who that is.
Receiving emergency action message. Recommend alert 1.
the battle for survival begins.
That's a message fragment.
Sir, we don't know what this message means. Our target package could have changed.
I've made a decision.
There's no place for fear.
He's lost his nerve.
I'd rather go out myself and get this one wrong.
There's no room for mistakes.
If we launch and we're wrong, what's left of Russia is going to launch at us.
I'm captain of this boat. I don't have to think this over.
There's no time for doubt.
Missile system's ready to launch in 6 minutes.
You repeat this order or I'll find somebody who will.
Hell no, you won't, sir.
And nothing can stop the tide.
So this kind of came out of a time in the early 90s where Disney wanted to capitalize on the success of the 1990 film Hunt for Red October by John McTiernan. Suddenly submarine movies were kind of in the vogue and they wanted their own submarine movie. They had enlisted a writer by the name of Michael Schiffer, along with another writer by the name of Richard Henrik, director Tony Scott, and producers Don Simpson and Jerry Bruckheimer to come up with something. Simpson and Bruckheimer managed to get the United States Navy to allow this group of people to spend time on a nuclear submarine and follow around the officers of that submarine. Specifically, this was the USS Florida, which was a Trident missile submarine. So they spent a couple of weeks on the sub. They followed around specifically the executive officer, a man by the name of William Toady, who had an extraordinary career in the United States Navy. The story that they were working on, at least the one that they told the Navy, was that the officers of the ship were working to overcome a rogue computer who had kind of taken over the ship and was getting ready to launch the missiles due to some erroneous information. Think about Hunt for Red October mixed with 2001: A Space Odyssey is basically what they were going for. By the time they got off the ship and in later development, this had turned into this idea of a mutiny and a battle between the first officer, who was kind of less jingoistic and less willing to, push the button, and an old school captain who was just, I'm going to follow the orders that I have in hand, and that's all I'm going to do. Obviously, once the Navy got a hold of this, they did not want to participate in a film about a mutiny on a nuclear submarine. The idea had come from a real-life event that occurred during the Cuban Missile Crisis, where a Soviet nuclear submarine, a nuclear-armed submarine, it was a diesel-electric boat, but they had lost contact with command in Moscow, and they believed that to be a sign that the war had started, and they were almost ready to launch a nuclear torpedo at U.S. naval ships, and fortunately, that was averted. At one point, they were so desperate to get shots of a submarine that they actually had their lawyers check out to see whether it was illegal to film a submarine on the open sea. Turns out that it's not. And so they hired a helicopter to follow a submarine out of Pearl Harbor. Coincidentally, it was the USS Alabama. And they followed the submarine and shot footage of it coming out to sea and diving. And that is the footage that you see in the movie. There was kind of bootleg footage of a U.S. nuclear sub. Most of the film was shot in Culver Studios in Culver City, California, including one sequence of shots that were done in the city pool. I believe those are the shots of the ship flooding. They built the sets and lowered them into the pool. Some of the scenes were shot at Chapman University, which are standing in for the Navy headquarters at Pearl Harbor. Michael Schiffer did most of the writing on this. He did the screenplay. He was known for Colors, Lean on Me, Peacemaker. There was some dialogue that was written by a young screenwriter by the name of Quentin Tarantino, who came in and did some of the work, and you can kind of see it. Specifically, I think he's responsible for like the comic book stuff, the Star Trek stuff. Apparently, he and Denzel Washington did not get along, and Denzel was very much not in favor of a lot of his dialogue, which was much more Tarantino than what wound up in the film, including racial slurs, use of the N-word, that type of thing. And that stuff was kind of pulled out of the script on Denzel Washington's insistence. Apparently, they have kind of made up, and even though they haven't worked together, they've gotten to where they can be in the same room at the same time. Dream Quest Images, which is a company that had done The Abyss, The Crow, Total Recall, they were brought in to do effects, specifically the underwater shots, the quote-unquote underwater shots, because a lot of them were not done underwater. They were done in a dry environment using haze machines. But it was really, at the time, it was very groundbreaking what they did with the submarine models in this film. We'll talk about casting as we get into the film. One last thing is the score, which is done by Hans Zimmer. It's one of his early works. Very orchestral, but a lot of synths, a lot of heavy music, a lot of tonality. Not big on like orchestral melody stuff. It's much more of a moody, heavy kind of score. I really like the score, especially this kind of last time watching it. The score really kind of hit me probably differently than it ever had. I remember this movie coming out and being, a big fan of The Hunt for Red October, being a big fan of just submarine movies in general. I grew up watching war movies with my father. Gene Hackman fan, Denzel Washington fan. So to see this coming out, I remember going to Disney in the early 90s, probably early 95 or late 94, and seeing promotional material. They had posters up and really being like, wow, I need to see this movie when it comes out. And it did not disappoint. I really love this movie. This is one of my favorite movies. And I love Tony Scott as a director. Obviously at this point, he's well known for Top Gun, as well as Beverly Hills Cop 2. He had done Days of Thunder with Tom Cruise. He had done The Last Boy Scout with Bruce Willis, Damon Wayans. He had done True Romance, which was a film that was written by Quentin Tarantino. Tony Scott is pound for pound probably one of my favorite directors. I mean, he goes on to do stuff like Enemy of the State, Man on Fire, which we've done on this channel, Deja Vu, Unstoppable. Is every film great? No, not every film is great. Taking Pelham 1, 2, 3 is kind of unfortunate. Deja Vu is maybe not the easiest watch, although it's probably like a guilty pleasure for me. But he's really got, for a fairly short career, he's got a string of really great movies. I think that Michael Bay is basically built a career trying to be Tony Scott in terms of his visual language. if you look at, an early Michael Bay film versus a Tony Scott film, an early Tony Scott film, like compare something like this film or Top Gun or The Last Boy Scout to something like Armageddon or The Rock, you're going to see an awful lot of similarities in the visual language. But let's get into the film. So we start essentially with a title card, and the card says, the three most powerful men in the world, the President of the United States, the President of the Russian Republic, and the captain of a U.S. nuclear missile submarine. The funny part is I was thinking about this, and maybe the movie shows that that's not true, because at the end of the day, Ramsey doesn't really get his way. But I think it's the point that the movie's trying to make is the immense responsibility and power that rests in a very few people on one of these nuclear submarines. And if they decided that they wanted to end the world or start a nuclear apocalypse, then they definitely can, because there's really nobody who's going to be able to stop them. Then we get some quick exposition via some, news broadcasts. There's a reporter on a French aircraft carrier, the Foch, which actually happened. The French Navy participated in the production of this film. They allowed the production team to film on the Foch. But we talk about that there's a civil war in Russia. There's this guy named Marchenko. They've taken over, and they've taken some military assets, and maybe they've taken nuclear bombs. Maybe they don't. They probably don't have the launch codes. You also get this scene with Hunter, played by Denzel Washington, and WEPS, or the weapons officer, Peter Ince, who, and apparently they're friends, and they're at this kid's birthday party. So Denzel Washington, what do we really need to say about him? By this time, he's already done Malcolm X. He's already done Philadelphia. In fact, this is the movie that he did right after Philadelphia. This is his first outing with Tony Scott of several. We've already talked about Man on Fire in a prior episode. Check that episode out. Denzel's got a couple of guys that he just keeps going back to. Tony Scott was one of them, Unstoppable, Taking Pelham 1, 2, 3, Man on Fire, Deja Vu. Also, Anton Fuqua, he keeps working with, he likes what he likes, and he's got a couple of directors. He did a few films with Spike Lee. Just last year, he did Gladiator 2 with Ridley Scott, Tony Scott's brother. He's got a couple guys that he just likes to work with, gets in his zone, and they just let him cook, and this is one of those films. Viggo Mortensen, on the other hand, this is a guy who at this point hadn't really found that big role and big success. He came out of the box pretty strong in Witness, did a bunch of films. Probably most notable is Carlito's Way. But he did a bunch of films, American Yakuza, Floundering, Young Americans, Boiling Point. He would follow this up with probably his next big role was probably as Command Master Chief Jack Urgel in G.I. Jane. But he would really obviously hit his big stride in 2001 with Lord of the Rings. After that, it was just sky's the limit as far as he goes. At this point in his career, he's probably more of like a that guy. You go in to see this film and you're kind of like, oh, I know who that guy is. I don't really know anything that he's done, or maybe I've seen him in a couple of movies, or that episode of Miami Vice he was in. Then we get the meeting with Ramsey and Hunter. Now, Ramsey, Captain Ramsey, obviously played by the great, the legendary Gene Hackman. The reason we're doing this film today, this week. We saw Gene Hackman in our episode on Superman the movie. You should definitely check that one out. That's a great episode. Gene Hackman is, and I don't think I'm obviously unique in saying this, he's one of my favorite actors of all time. Just the films this guy has been in are just absolutely incredible. Bonnie and Clyde and French Connection, Young Frankenstein, The Conversation, Uncommon Valor, Bat 2-1, Hoosiers. I could just, The Package, Enemy of the State. I could just go on and on and on. The end of his career is a little ignominious with Welcome to Mooseport being his last film. That's, what a way to go out after that career. The thing about Gene Hackman is he's like kind of Like, there's nothing really outstanding about him. He's just kind of a normal guy. Like, you could be standing next to him on line at the deli. He's not, he's not good looking. He's not particularly tall. He's not, overly physical. But there is something about him that is so commanding when he's on the screen that it's really hard to see anybody else, even somebody as much of a powerhouse as Denzel Washington is, when he's sharing the screen with Gene Hackman. The man is just, there's just something about him that draws your eye to him, something about his voice that makes you want to listen to him, probably why he was successful doing voiceovers and commercials and stuff. This is maybe one of my favorite of his roles. You get that between like this and Enemy of the State, and honestly even Superman. I mean, his turn on Lex Luthor was pretty crazy. But I really love him in this. There's so much nuance and there's so much subtlety, and he does so much in this role with just like a glance or a look. He'll talk to somebody and that person will turn away, and then he'll give them a look afterwards. And I'll try to point it out a little bit, but obviously it's hard to do in an audio podcast. But he'll just give a look, and that look will just convey so much. Or it's just a pause. He'll pause, take a puff on his cigar, a little bit of a smile, and there's just so much going on behind those eyes in terms of thinking about what's going on, what he thinks of this other character, what he thinks the situation is. It's just such an in-depth performance that I just really love it. So they have this meeting, they get together, and he does this explanation about how his XO is out and Hunter is on the short list.
As you no doubt heard, my XO has appendicitis. He's the best I ever had. I need a good man to fill his spot. Your name was at the top of the list.
Well, that's good to know, sir.
It was a short list.
But it's almost as if he's holding something back. There's a little bit of hesitation. Watching it again, I almost get the feeling that, he makes it seem like it's his thought, like I picked you off the list. But I almost get the feeling that he didn't, or that he was pressured, or that it was heavily suggested to him that he take Hunter. I don't necessarily know that Hunter is the kind of guy that Ramsey would have picked off of a list. He seems to be almost the antithesis of everything that Hunter is. And you could argue that, really smart and successful people, they stack the room with people who are going to disagree with them and see a different viewpoint. I don't get Ramsey as that kind of guy. I think Ramsey wants people in the room who are going to be like him and are going to, guys like we'll meet later, like Doherty and Zimmer, who are going to follow him and listen to him and follow his orders almost blindly. Like he's the smartest guy in the room, and I think he feels challenged by somebody like Hunter, Harvard educated, War College, somebody who we'll talk about it later, has to know the why as well as the what. And he almost looks at that as a negative, I think. So we get a little briefing with the officers, and we have their orders. They're going to be on a patrol in the North Pacific. They're going to be ready for a preemptive strike if Rodchenko gets a hold of the launch codes and starts to fuel his missiles. And they'll only have a short period of time to respond if they detect that there's going to be a launch. They get the whole crew standing out in the rain on the dock. Ramsey gives, kind of the Roll Tide pep talk.
There's trouble in Russia. So they called us. And we're going over there and bringing the most lethal killing machine ever devised. We're capable of launching more firepower than has ever been released in the history of war.
The ship gets underway, and there's another moment when they're on the conning tower, and Ramsey has Hunter dive the ship, but there's this little hesitation, the way he's looking at Hunter is almost like he doesn't trust him. We have this dinner of the officers in the wardroom where they're kicking around and they start talking about the nuclear bombs that were dropped on Japan and should that have been done. Did Hunter disagree with that? They get into this conversation about von Clausewitz. For those of you who don't know, Karl von Clausewitz was a Prussian general who was also a writer and a military theorist, and he was very much promoting the idea of a moral war, about soldiers and especially leadership having to keep a moral high ground throughout battles. He lived in the 18th and 19th century. So they get down to this conversation about, who Hunter thinks the true enemy is.
I'm very impressed. In other words, the sailor most likely to win the war is the one most willing to part company with the politicians and ignore everything except the destruction of the enemy. That you'd agree with that?
I'd agree that that's what Clausewitz was trying to say.
But you wouldn't agree with it?
No, sir, I do not. No, I just think that in the nuclear world, a true enemy can't be destroyed.
Attention on deck. Von Clausewitz will now tell us exactly who the real enemy is. Von?
In my humble opinion, in the nuclear world, the true enemy is war itself.
And so really here we're setting up the main conflict. Ramsey makes this comment about how Rickover gave me my command, gave me a button to push and told me how to push it. The Navy seems to want you to know why. And like I said, he looks at that as almost a detriment. Like, it's not my job to worry about the whys. That's other people worry about the whys. They tell me to push the button, I push the button. Hunter is obviously a different breed of soldier, and he needs to know the why. He needs to make sure that they are on the moral high ground, which is something that Ramsey doesn't really kind of worry himself about. You could also see in this scene that Ramsey he's got his posse. We meet some of the other guys that are in this. Matt Craven as Zimmer, a pre-Sopranos James Gandolfini as Doherty, a very pre-NCIS Rocky Carroll as Westergaard, a couple of the other officers. And now we kind of busy ourselves with the day-to-day life on a submarine, and all of a sudden there is an emergency. So there is a fire in the galley, and the XO is sent down there to address it, to deal with that as an emergency. And it's at this point where Ramsey decides that he wants to do a missile drill. So while Hunter is fighting the fire, he's doing a missile drill, and which means Hunter has to come up because he has to be part of it. Because there's this whole routine, and we're going to hear it multiple times where they get a message, they confirm the message. Westergaard and Zimmer have to go and get these coded tablets out of a safe. They break them open. They confirm that the message is real. They have this routine where everybody confirms that the message is properly formatted, that it's authentic. Then the captain has to give the orders, and the XO has to confirm the orders. And we're going to see this like 3 times. So in the middle of this, Hunter tries to, quietly pull kind of aside to Ramsey, just mention something about, maybe we should, focus on the fire. Ramsey just cuts him off. It's not the time for this.
Set condition 1, SQ for WSRT. This is the captain. This is an exercise.
Set condition 1 SQ for WSRT. This is the XO. This is an exercise.
Captain, that fire in the galley could still flare.
Now's not the time. Make your depth 150 feet. All stop.
So they finish up the drill, or actually they don't finish up the drill because the chief in the galley, he dies because of the fire. So they end the drill. They go down. They see to that, and then Ramsey brings Hunter into his cabin and basically proceeds to kind of dress him down a little bit about like interfering with him, that he decided that he wanted to take advantage of the confusion of the fire instead of letting it be their focus.
Would you run the drill?
No, sir, I would not.
Why not?
The fire in the galley could have flared back up. I would have seen to it first, sir.
I'm sure you would have. Me, on the other hand, I tend to think that that's the best time to run a drill. Confusion on a ship is nothing to fear. It should be taken advantage of. Lest you forget, Mr. Hunter, we are a ship of war, designed for battle. You don't just fight battles when everything is hot.
Which I guess I kind of understand. I mean, it's a warship, and there's going to be chaotic, confusing time, and you still need to operate under that time. So I understand Ramsey, but on the other hand, I also understand Hunter. And while Hunter acknowledges that this death wasn't because of the missile drill, it's kind of something that's going to affect the men on the ship. So they sit down, they have this conversation, and basically Ramsey's point is we need to stick together and we need not to question each other.
Just so we understand each other. I don't have any problems with questions or doubts. As I said to you before, I'm not seeking the company of kiss asses. But you got something to say to me, you say it in private. And if privacy doesn't permit itself, then you bite your tongue.
Which is a point to which Hunter does agree. And then Ramsey gives, I think, really this really significant line about preserving democracy, not practicing it.
Those sailors out there are just boys. Boys who are training to do a terrible and unthinkable thing. And if that ever occurs, the only reassurance they'll have that they're doing the proper thing is going to derive from their unqualified belief in the unified chain of command. That means we don't question each other's motives in front of the crew. It means we don't undermine each other. It means in a missile drill, they hear your voice right after mine without hesitation. Do you agree with that policy, sailor?
Absolutely, sir.
We're here to preserve democracy, not to practice it.
And now you kind of know what this is all about. Hunter goes to Wepps. Wepps is just like, look, you just got to, Ramsey's going to be who he's going to be. You got to calm down. And now we find out that Rodchenko has gotten the codes. And so there's another briefing. The ship is now at DEFCON 3. It's a high alert status.
The only safeguard was that the Russian government controlled the launch codes. Intel now indicates that those launch codes have been compromised. And U.S. military forces have been directed to set DEFCON 3. The last time we hit this state of emergency was 32 and a half years ago during the Cuban Missile Crisis.
And Hunter's walking through the ship, and he sees that there's a fight in the mess hall between Rivetti and some other guy, I forget who. And he asks him what they're fighting about, and Rivetti's kind of hesitant. But basically, they're fighting over a comic book character. And that just kind of illustrates to Hunter how much of a tinderbox the ship really is right now.
I lost my head, sir. I'm sorry.
Rivetti, you're a supervisor. You can get a commission like that.
I know it, sir. You're 100% right. It's never happen again,
It better not happen again. I see this kind of nonsense, I'm going to write you up. You understand? Do you understand?
Yes, sir.
You have to set an example even in the face of stupidity. Now, everybody that reads comic books knows that Kirby's Silver Surfer is the only true Silver Surfer. Now, am I right or wrong?
You're right, sir.
All right.
But you would also see that Hunter is really ingratiating himself to the men, and he's really trying to figure out who the men are and what they're capable of and empathizing with them, which is something that Ramsey is just, he's not really used to. That's not the way that he does things. So Hunter goes to Ramsey and is like, maybe we should pull back a little bit because the morale on the ship is low and the men are a little on edge. And Ramsey decides he's going to make an all-ship announcement, which is not exactly what Hunter is expecting.
Any crew member who feels he can't handle the situation can leave the ship right now. Gentlemen, we're at DEFCON 3. War is imminent. This is the captain. That is all.
Very inspiring, sir.
So we have another sequence where they get another one of these emergency action messages. This one's legitimate. It's time to launch the missiles. And now Ramsey is giving the orders to put the ship in a state of war and get ready to launch the missiles.
This is the captain. Set condition 1 SQ for strategic missile launch. Spin up missiles 1 through 5 and 20 through 24. The release of nuclear weapons has been authorized. This is not a drill.
He does, Gene Hackman, he's really great in this, right? And so he does this, he plays Ramsey so well, and I really like when he is being the captain and he is, acting in a kind of a commanding way, because he goes through this thing with the orders, he gets, he turns it over to Hunter so Hunter can confirm the orders, And now he's going to have this conversation with the crew. He's going to be the captain, and he's going to explain to these men and try to get them in the mindset that this is what they're going to do, because they're going to do this terrible thing of launching nuclear weapons on another nation.
Gentlemen, this is the captain. We have an Akula-class submarine out there. We know that Rodchenko controls at least 4 submarines. This could be one of them. Russian rebels have threatened to launch against our country and are fueling right now. They will have launch capability in 60 minutes. We also have orders to launch our missiles, which is exactly what we're going to do.
So they're getting ready to get the ship up. Sonar people, Rivetti hears, they find that there's another submarine. Of course there is. There's another submarine, a Russian Akula-class attack submarine, and it's nearby. So there's this whole sequence where they're going deep, and then they have to come up, and they have to launch their missiles. The Russian submarine hears them, and there's an attack, and it's really a good action sequence. This is, it's a submarine movie, but it's honestly not really an action movie, but this is a great action sequence.
1,000 yards and closing fast!
Con, radio, receiving emergency action message. Recommend alert 1. Recommend alert 1.
950 yards!
Launch a 5-inch evasion device. Launch your countermeasures.
Countermeasures away, sir!
Shift your rudder to left full.
In the middle of this attack, they get another message, but it's cut off because they're too deep. The radio buoy doesn't work because, of course, it doesn't. And now there's a conflict between Hunter and Ramsey, because Ramsey's like, he's old school. I got these orders in my hand. That's what I'm going to do. I do not have a contradictory order, so I'm going to launch my missiles. And Hunter's like, yeah, but we got another message. We just don't know what it says. We need to go up to depth. We need to listen and find out if they're trying to send us a message that tells us not to launch the missiles.
Captain, got the EAM. What do you think?
I think there's nothing on this.
Yes, sir. It got cut off during the attack.
Then it's meaningless.
Sir, this is an EAM pertaining to nuclear missile.
No, Mr. Hunter. That's a message fragment.
He refuses to concur with the order, and there's this fight between the two of them where basically they're both trying to relieve each other.
Weapons, Con. Ship targeting to target package SLBM 64741/2. This is the captain.
Captain, I cannot concur.
Repeat my command.
Sir, we don't know what this message means. Our target package could have changed.
You repeat this order, or I'll find somebody who will.
Hell no, you won't, sir.
You're relieved of your position.
And so it comes down to Ramsey calling on Cobb. Cobb is an abbreviation, is a Navy acronym for Chief of the Boat. He's the senior enlisted man on the boat, the chief petty officer. He's in charge of, among other things, security on the boat. But he's siding with Hunter because, according to regulations, Hunter is right. And this is George Zunza. He'd been in a bunch of movies, including The Deer Hunter and No Mercy and No Way Out and No Man's Land. He was also one of the original detectives on Law and Order, but had done just hundreds of episodes of television. Just kind of a really, really well-known character actor, and he's really good in this role. And he, like I said, he signs with Hunter. Hunter winds up relieving Ramsey. Ramsey gets locked in his quarters during the remainder of this attack. Hunter blows up the other submarine. Ducky and Zimmer break the captain out. There's another standoff. And basically we're going to come down to the point where it's Ramsey against Hunter again. Hunter's not sneaking around the boat, but he's like below. He's trying to get the radio fixed. This kid Vossler is working on the radio. And Hunter does this, again, going into pop culture. This has got to be Tarantino. Does this Star Trek bit.
You ever watch Star Trek? Star Trek, you know, Star Trek, USS Enterprise. All right, you remember when the Klingons were going to blow up the Enterprise and Captain Kirk calls down to Scotty? He says, Scotty, I got to have more power.
He needs more warp speed.
Warp speed, exactly. Yeah. Well, I'm Captain Kirk. You're Scotty. I need more power. I'm telling you, if you do not get this radio up, a
billion people.
Ramsey and his guys retake the con. Now everybody's kind of together. They bring Hunter, they get Hunter, they bring Hunter up.
May I have your attention, please? Crew of the USS Alabama. An attempted mutiny has been put down. We'll maintain security alert. Authorize movement only in two-man teams. In the absence of further radio communication, on orders from the National Command Center, we'll achieve launch depth as quickly as we can for strategic missile launch.
And there's another message coming through, which Ramsey, as much as you think he wants to ignore it, he really can't ignore it. So they figure out how to get the radio fixed. They're getting the message. Basically, they figure out that they've got 3 minutes until they read the message. And then there's this weird bit, but it's kind of not weird when you look at it in the context of the movie, of they're just sitting there waiting for the message and they're staring at each other and there's all this tension. And Ramsey lights his cigar and just starts talking about horses.
Speaking of horses, did you ever see those Lippinzahner stallions?
What?
From Portugal. The Lippinzahner stallions. Most highly trained horses in the world. They're all white.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. You're aware they're all white, or yes, sir? You've seen them?
Yes, sir, I've seen them. Yes, sir, I'm aware that they're all white. They're not from Portugal, they're from Spain. And at birth, they're not white. They're black. Sir.
I didn't know that. But they are from Portugal.
The funny thing about this is they're having this argument over the Lippinzahner stallions, which are acrobatic horses. They do, horse dancing and tricks and stuff like that. And Ramsey's saying they're from Portugal. Hunter's saying they're from Spain. The funny part is they're both wrong. Lippinzahner stallions are from Slovenia. They're part of the old Habsburg Empire. They were bred in that environment. So both of them are wrong, although they are a Spanish breed of horse. So I guess Hunter's probably closer. And then there's this bit about they're all white, but they're born black. I don't know if that's supposed to be a racial thing, probably to some degree. But then now they got the message. The new message comes in. They're waiting for Westergaard and Zimmer to bring it up. Ramsey's like, God help you if you're wrong.
Alert one. Doherty, Westergaard, Zimmer, get that EAM.
Aye, sir.
God help you if you're wrong.
If I'm wrong, then we're at war. God help us all.
So obviously they finally get the message, and the message is cancel the launch order. Hunter was right the whole time. A lot of these significant glances going back and forth, but then Ramsey turns the ship over to Hunter and goes below to his cabin. We're left with an epilogue where there's a hearing, a mutiny on a ship, nuclear weapons, procedures broken. The admiral here is the great Jason Robards, another guy who's just been in a bajillion movies. This is one of his last movies. He did a couple of uncredited bits at the end of his career for Tony Scott in this one and in Enemy of the State. His final film was Magnolia in 1999, the Tom Cruise film. He passed away in late 2000. I knew Jason Robards personally. I had met him a couple of times. He was at one point he was a client of mine. Great guy. Would very down to earth. Would just sit down and have a conversation with you. And it was really a privilege knowing him. But he basically gets us to a point where Ramsey's going to retire. Hunter's going to be recommended for his next command based on a strong recommendation from Ramsey. And, the Navy is going to take a good hard look at what happened and make some adjustments going forward, we can hope.
For the record, it is the conclusion of this panel that your actions aboard the Alabama were consistent with the best traditions of the Navy and in the interests of the United States. As such, the recommendations of this panel will be to accept, in a manner reflective of his long and dedicated service to his country, Captain Ramsey's request for early retirement from active duty, and based in no small part on Captain Ramsey's recommendation that Lieutenant Commander Hunter be given his next command at the earliest possible convenience.
There's one last scene of them outside as Ramsey gets his dog from the poor sailor whose job is just to stand there holding the dog for who knows how long. And that's it. That's the end of the film. So this film had a $53 million budget. It had an $18 million opening weekend. And it wound up with $91 million in the U.S., $66 million internationally for a total of $157 against a budget of $53. That's pretty good. It's got an 89 on Rotten Tomatoes. It's got an A on CinemaScore, 3.5 stars from Roger Ebert. Roger said, "This is the rare war movie that not only thrills people while they're watching it, but invites them to leave the theater and actually discuss the issues." Generally speaking, it got fairly positive reviews. It was nominated for 3 Academy Awards: film editing, sound, and sound editing, which is special effects. It lost editing to Apollo 13. It lost sound to Apollo 13. And it lost sound editing to Braveheart. I mean, a couple of real power hitters that year. So that is Crimson Tide. And that is our tribute to the great Gene Hackman. If you watch the short we have on YouTube, I was originally going to go with a short of the submarine attack because I thought that it was probably the most exciting piece of the movie. But then I thought, like, we're doing this because of Gene Hackman. So I wound up doing the short of a moment, one of the better moments of Gene Hackman. So if you haven't watched it, take a look at the short. And it's also available on our Facebook page. So thank you for listening. Back to our regular programming next time. We're going to be doing the deep dive into the Sylvester Stallone movie Cliffhanger, which I promised you guys last time. And happy St. Patrick's Day.